Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought that I would talk about this little topic and this little situation that a certain amount of my commentators overall asked me to talk about, or at least a couple of them. So, I thought not only would I talk about it, but I thought that it was an interesting conversation as well. I'm not necessarily going to review a video in this video, I'm just going to give my little opinion on this situation. And of course, this is going to be the Demetrius Boo Boo Andrade recent situation. And of course, in recent news, from what we've heard about Demetrius Boo Boo Andrade, is that he is allegedly going to vacate his 160-pound WBO title. Now, of course, a certain amount of people may ask me, well, do you think that he is ducking his alleged mandatory, the Kazakh fighter? I believe his name is Janibek or Janibek. If I'm wrong about that, someone corrects me. I overall am not super familiar with him, but I have seen him fight. What I will say is this. The Kazakh fighters, in my opinion, they're very, very decently tough. They're almost like the European versions of the Argentine fighters. That's not me necessarily comparing their styles 100%, but what I am saying is this. They're similar to the fact where it's like this. Whenever you see an Argentine fighter very high in the ranks, there's not usually as many of Argentine fighters in the, as for Latino fighters as there would be Mexican fighters or Puerto Rican fighters or Cuban fighters. But when you see an Argentine fighter in the high ranks, you know that you're going to have a hell of a fight. Because Brian Gastano, Marcos Maidana, Lucas Matisse, Sergio Martinez, those are the ones that just personally come to mind at the current moment in time. Whenever you have an Argentine fighter that is usually in the very, very high ranks, they're usually very intelligent boxers. Some of them have very decent amateur pedigrees. When it comes down to it, they're very strong, very rough, very tough. It's the same thing with a lot of these Kazakh fighters. It is interesting that Demetrius Andrade would decide to vacate his 160-pound title now that Janibek is his mandatory, and this is pretty much the only opponent that he's had at 160 pounds that even has a pulse. It is what it is. Listen, what I'll say is this, because I know a lot of people, they like to jump to conclusions, and I know, a certain amount of people who may not like Andrade or, certain other things, they may say that he's allegedly ducking. Listen, what I'll say is this. I understand certain people's perspectives. What I'll say is this. I don't necessarily have a problem with Demetrius Boo Boo Andrade vacating his 160-pound title. I don't necessarily have a problem with it because, of course, he is allegedly going up to 168 to try and make his mandatory status for Mr. Canelo Alvarez. And on the surface, that looks great. But when you really take a look at Demetrius Boo Boo Andrade's career, it really does leave a lot to be desired. And you know what? Let me actually talk about Demetrius Boo Boo Andrade and when I first heard about him, because I've been hearing about this dude for the past several years. I mean, I started watching modern day boxing all the way back now, I believe in like 2014. So it's been pretty much about 8 years now. I've been watching boxing now for about 10 years. But, of course, for those of you that have heard my stories before, I started watching boxing clips of older fighters like Mike Tyson and Muhammad Ali, excuse me, but certain fighters like that, older clips like that. But I started watching Floyd Mayweather Jr., Miguel Cotto, Manny Pacquiao around 2014. That's when I really caught them. And even back then, I was hearing about this dude Demetrius Boo Boo Andrade from certain YouTube channels. And this was even when Canelo Alvarez and Erislandy Lara and Austin Trout and all these guys were still in that 154-pound weight division. And I was hearing certain people like Dante's Boxing Nation. Now, of course, Dante, in my opinion, he alleges a lot of things that he probably can't prove. But it wasn't just him back then. A lot of people back then were saying this dude, Demetrius Boo Boo Andrade, is the best 154-pounder in the world and is the most talented. Now, is that maybe a little bit more wishful thinking? I don't know. Listen, I did not really get to see a lot of the earlier fights of Demetrius Boo Boo Andrade, but I've been watching him now for a very long time. And I've seen a certain amount of his performances when it comes down to it. And, Demetrius Andrade, to me, he's almost like that one movie or that one show or, if you play video games, like that one video game. He's like that one movie that everyone says is so great, and it's an underground classic, even though it doesn't have the biggest amount of fans, but you gotta watch it. It's a must-watch. But then you watch it, and then it's like, that movie really wasn't that great. You know what I mean? That's kind of what Demetrius Boo Boo Andrade reminds me of. Whenever I see him, whenever I watch him, I've never just looked at him and said, oh my God, You know, that dude, best 160 pounder in the world. Or, you know, he'll beat Canelo. He'll beat Charlo definitively. I've just never seen him like that. I think that the best performance of Demetrius Andrade's career that I've ever seen, just in terms of all-around performance, you know, showing off his whole entire possible skill set, it was against this one fighter a few years ago. I believe this happened all the way back in 2018, so now about 40 years ago. It was against an African fighter by the name of Walter something. I don't remember the last name. But this dude was even bigger than Demetrius Andrade was. No, he wasn't the most skilled fighter, but he was decently big, decently powerful. So the performance that Andrade had was decently impressive. That's the only performance in Demetrius Andrade's career that I've really taken a look at. And I said, you know what? If that Andrade shows up against any of these fighters, even against Canelo Alvarez, he may be able to provide them with a lot of trouble. But every other performance I've seen in Demetrius Andrade's career, I always thought that he was way too sloppy. I didn't think he was as defensively responsible as he needed to be. You know, he doesn't appear to have an A-grade chin to me when it comes down to it. It's no offense against Andrade. I think he is a talented fighter, and especially with his size, you know, because he's a little bit lengthier and bigger than the majority of the people around his weight divisions, he can give certain people problems. But I've never seen Demetrius Andrade on the same level as many people always try to claim that he is. I've never seen it. You know, like I said, it's like when people always try to tell you that, oh, this is the next best thing, this is the next best thing. But then you actually try it, and it's like, wasn't that impressed. You know what I mean? That's what Demetrius Andrade is. He's like one of those cult classic movies, you know, that are very, very popular with a lot of people, but then you actually try it, and you just don't see the appeal. You know, maybe he's just not for me. I don't know. But like I said, I'm not a fan of any of these fighters. But some of my most favorite fighters to watch are very decently slick defensive fighters. When I seen Erislandy Lara in his prime, I thought that dude was a defensive wizard. And he is. He was. When I take a look at Demetrius Andrade, he's good. But like I said, he almost appears to be a more watered-down version of Erislandy Lara. That's what he appears to me to be. Less defensively responsible, doesn't have the feet, doesn't have the movement. The only thing I would think that makes him possibly a bigger threat than Lara is his size. That's really about it. I think that Andrade, don't get me wrong, I think he's a very talented fighter. But listen, just to get to the bones of this conversation, just to talk about it, Andrade, I think that if he is going to get that Canelo Alvarez fight, there's only one fight, in my opinion, that is for sure going to get you that Canelo Alvarez fight, and that's possibly facing David Benavidez. You're also possibly, in my opinion, going to have to try to face Caleb Plant, Billy Joe Saunders, maybe Jamal Charlo if Canelo Alvarez is able to get to him, or if you can get a hold of him first. Jamal Charlo is not interested in facing Demetrius Andrade whatsoever. So when it comes down to it, Charlo more than likely is not going to face him unless he already has a loss in his record. So you're going to have to start overall going after some of the bigger names. And don't get me wrong, that's not me saying that, you know, Demetrius Andrade, that he has not gotten after some of the big names in the past. But at the end of the day, when you really take a look at his career and some of the opportunities, in my opinion, that he's really let slide by, you were supposed to have that one fight with Jamal Charlo several years ago, but you turned it down because you thought that you were getting lowballed with money. And I understand, but at the end of the day, you got to take an opportunity like that. Because if you truly think that you're going to win that fight, you know, you got to see the forest beyond the trees when it comes down to it. And you got to say, okay, whatever. Yeah, it might be low money now, but this is an opportunity for me, for myself, to prove myself. You know, I understand the thing of, I'm not going to, take any money less than what I think I'm worth. But listen, dude, at the end of the day, you're trying to get big time opportunities. And it was you several years ago who turned down that Jamal Charlo fight. I've also heard from certain sources, I'm not necessarily sure how true this is, that apparently when you had the opportunity to make yourself a mandatory for Canelo Alvarez last year with the WBO, apparently you did not institute it. So the big question is about Demetrius Andrade is this: how serious is he really about getting some of these big fights? We'll see. At the end of the day, like I said, if Demetrius Andrade is moving up to 168, I don't necessarily have a problem with that. But if you're going to be moving up to 168, I think the best thing for you to do is probably to sign with the PBC or sign with Showtime. I don't know if he's ever personally been there when it comes down to it. And you got to either try to get your hands on Jamal Charlo. Caleb Plant is another big fight as well when it comes down to it. Billy Joe Saunders maybe even because he has a loss on his record now and he might be willing to face you. The big fight I think I would like to see Demetrius Andrade in is against David Benavidez. Will he want to fight him? We'll see. Danny Jacobs is another one that I think would be a big name for him. I don't think Danny is necessarily the same fighter that he even was a few years ago. But when it comes down to it, it'd still be a decent name and gets you more popularity. But apparently, from what I'm hearing, they won't fight each other because they're very, very good friends. Listen, dude, if you're a person that is looking for any opportunity, sometimes that's going to have to happen. It just is what it is. And when I take a look at Demetrius Andrade, you're 33 years old. You're 33 years old. You have 31 fights on your resume. You've never beat a legitimate champion. Never. It just is what it is. I don't think there's one legitimate champion that's ever won an official title on his resume. So at the end of the day, Demetrius Andrade, in my opinion, he's going to have to start, stepping up a little bit. Once again, that's not me saying that every single big fight in his career overall did not happen just because it was 100% his fault. But there is certain things, in my opinion, that he let slip out of his grasp. So at the end of the day, like I said, I need to see you in some of the bigger fights. And David Benavidez, I think, is the way to go. All right? And that's going to be a very tough fight for both of them. And if you are this big talent that everyone has been alleging you to be for the past several years, when it comes down to it, you will pull out of that David Benavidez fight. To me, that's a 50-50 fight, and that's a fight that I may even slightly favor David Benavidez in, because that would be really the first fighter who actually has a pulse overall that Andrade has ever really fought. Well, let me not say that. He fought Vanos Martirosyan, even though I'm going to say that Martirosyan is A grade, but you know what I mean. But when it comes down at the end of the day, it's like this. If you were to fight David Benavidez, you have to pull out of that fight. And David Benavidez said that he's willing to take on all comers. Everyone's allegedly avoiding him. Demetrius Andrade said that, he's willing to take on all comers. Everyone's allegedly avoiding him. Okay, so fight each other. That's what Sean Porter and Terence Crawford had to do. No one would allegedly want to fight them. So the only answer was to fight each other. You know what I mean? It is what it is. So Andrade, in my opinion, is going to have to try to go after David Benavidez. That's the fight overall they should be trying to go after. And if you are anywhere near the talent that people have been trying to allege that you are for the past several years, you will win that fight. And it's not going to be easy, because David Benavidez, he's naturally bigger than you. And all in all, he has about the same reach as you, I believe. And on top of that, he's pretty much a natural light heavyweight. And he's about 6'2". Well, Andrade is about 6'1" or 6'2" as well. But if Andrade is the talent that many people try to allege that he is, if he is a person that is going to give a lot of problems to Canelo or a certain amount of these other fighters, he'll beat David Benavidez. So it's going to be time to see how great Demetrius Andrade really is. It'll be interesting to see what he does. But anyways, that's really my opinion on the situation, and I'll talk to you all later.